All right, there we go. All right, so kind of some background for our organization. Diane Henry and I started this organization back in spring of 2020, right around the time the pandemic hit. And in particular, we started it because we wanted to be able to become part of this organization, this group, which is called Thriving Earth Exchange, through the American Geological Union. And what they do is they help partner communities like ours who are struggling with various issues related to the environment in some capacity with different scientists, depending on the issue that you're dealing with, to be able to help address the issues. And so for us, what they did is they actually then partnered us with some hydrologists, which kind of expanded our network and continued, and we'll talk about that in a moment, to be able to help us kind of figure out what's going on with the flooding. And so that kind of launched us into one of our projects. And then from there, it kind of launched us into many of the other projects we're going to talk about in a moment. But before I get into that too far, I did want to give you kind of an overview. So as I mentioned, our organization has kind of shifted a little bit in the past few months, which is actually a good thing. We have now so many new people who've joined and are helping for a number of years. It's been a small group, and now we are a much larger group, which is awesome. And so because of that, we have been shifting kind of the structure of our organization. So to kind of walk you through the structure, and I'm doing this so that you get a sense of the roles of different folks. I'm Dr. Amber Bismack. For those that don't know, I'm the executive director. I live up on the north side of Ore Lake. I've been here for going on 10 years now. As I said, Diane Henry, she started this with me. She's a neighbor up here as well. She's the assistant director with me. Jeff Henry is our website director, and he helps coordinate any of the technology type of things that we have going on, including getting the listserv set up or anything. So if you ever feel you're having issues with accessing emails or something, he's the one to contact. Carrie Adams is our technical director, and he'll talk about what his work there. And then for a while, we had Andrea Clausen as our secretary, which thank you to Andrea, but she has chosen to move on to other things. And so now we have Maureen Malloy, who's serving as our secretary, which is wonderful. And then from that, like I said, we've kind of expanded. So we actually now at this point are working with, we have 7 different projects going on, and those different projects are taken up by different project teams. And so each team has a number of folks volunteering, and a number of you on this call right now are volunteers on this, which is great. But those teams are led by different folks. And so in a moment, we'll be turning it over to these folks to kind of share updates, but just kind of an overview leading into that. The upstream inundation study, so that's work with both the Army Corps of Engineers and also with hydrologists that we work with that I just talked about through that American Geological Union Thriving Earth Exchange program. Carrie Adams, myself, and Diane Henry are the ones leading that effort. Another aspect looking at upstream is specifically looking at the development upstream and what we can do about the excessive continued development and growth in the Brighton area and Howell and things like that, that all leads to more water coming to us. Jay McDowell, who is, he has family here on the lake, but he also is a teacher at Innovation Academy. He's leading that effort with folks here and then with students. You'll hear more about that. And then we have 2 projects looking at the outflow on the Huron River. So one specifically is the river outflow itself. And so Tony Licata and Brian Bismack are the ones leading up that effort. We'll hear from them in a moment. And the other project focusing on outflow is looking at the Portage Lake Fluke Dam. And Kurt Richardson is leading that project as well. He's not able to be here tonight, but we'll be able to hear about what their project is working on. And then we have 3 projects looking at flood response. And so one of them is focused on getting grants through FEMA to help folks elevate their homes out of the floodway. And so that project's led by Mark Tumbrink and myself. Another one is looking at different disaster designations. So right now, the way disaster designations work in the state of Michigan is that there's the only way disaster can be determined is if like houses are floating away and basically all of the resources are used up and there's nothing else that no one can do, then a disaster is determined. And so in Michigan, that becomes a problem, particularly for our community where we're in a disaster, but we're not at that point. So this group is actually looking at trying to figure out other ways of working through that. I'm leading that effort. And then as many of us know, likely all of us on this call, that back in 2021, the flood level at the gauge on the Huron River changed from 6.5 feet to 7 feet. We are working to try and see if we can find a way to get that change back down to 6.5 feet, and Carrie Adams is leading that effort. So to kind of jump right into some of this work, I'm going to turn it over to Carrie to talk a little bit about the flood inundation study and the work going on upstream.
Okay, thank you, Amber. We, on November 2nd, we pulled the transducer gauges out, and thanks to Diane and Jeff Henry and Dale Phillips, especially those guys, the ones that are crawling the water and have no fear. Thanks to Bob Sifton and the rest of our team for just being supportive of the team. So those gauges have been pulled, and I believe Jeff has already processed that data. Step 2 would be the river level gauges, which we call the witch sticks, that have trail cameras on them. 3 of the 4 cameras are still operating as far as we know. We lost one on East Riverside during the storm, and Tony Licata is going to see if he can, or Tom Toko, sorry, Tony. Tom Toko is going to see if he can find that camera. He's going out there with a rake. I tried to find it, couldn't, but we may not be able to save the camera, but there may be some data on the SD card left that we can pull. So we haven't pulled those gauges yet, simply because based on Kurt Richardson's idea that the Fluke Dam may be having some effect on our lake levels, we're going to wait till after the Fluke Dam gets readjusted and probably give it 7 to 10 days after that. We'll see if there's any effect on the gauges, and then we'll pull the remainder of that equipment out. And Jeff Henry and I have already agreed we'll just agree on a date, and we'll go pull the rest of the equipment out. So that will be probably the first week in December, somewhere in there. And then lastly, as far as the focusing on the lake, the flood level changes, our data is strictly going to be built on what I can glean from all of the iFlood reports. I thank everybody for putting in iFlood reports. That data and those photographs will help us put together hopefully a PowerPoint pitch that we can go and say, look, you guys are saying we went from 6.5 to 7.0. We think that's the wrong direction, and hopefully we're going to have the photographs and the data to prove that. So that would be the other team that we're going to try to get that data pulled together to go after that particular situation. And that's the extent of our team and our efforts.
Gary. So just to kind of add on a little bit, for the folks that are maybe new here, the gauges that Carrie is referring to, we have 2 gauges on South Ore Creek upstream of Ore Lake and 2 gauges on Dubrova Creek upstream of Ore Lake. Those are gathering data on the water levels of the water coming into Ore Lake through the city of Brighton and all of that, all the way up to M59. And then we also have a gauge at the culvert of Little Ore out into the river. So it's also gathering data on the water levels going out. So kind of we get the input output into the lake. So those are the gauges Carrie referred to that were removed. The ones that are still going to be removed later after the Fluke Dam is lowered, those are actually cameras that are taking picture of the lake levels. So we have one up on the north side of Ore Lake, one on the east side of Ore Lake, and one at Little Ore and one at the outlet of Little Ore into the Huron River. And those are cameras actually gauging the level of the lake itself. And so we'll be able to see maybe if once the Fluke Dam is lowered, what effect or any effect may that have on our lake levels. So those are the data that he's referring to.
Yep. Thanks, Amber.
Yep. The other thing I just wanted to mention is it's talking about the USACE here. That's the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. For any folks that were at our August meeting or other meetings of ours, you've heard us talk about the fact that we have what's called a flood inundation study through the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, which is basically what they're doing is they're using a lot of our data and some data that they've also collected on our lake, on South Ore Creek, on Dubrova Creek, and actually all the way up toward M59. They collected various data points, survey data, all of that stuff, a whole bunch of things. And they're using that to actually develop a model to then use that model and put inputs in it to decide, to figure out what can we do to actually stop the water from flooding us. And so the purpose of this model is to actually identify solutions, not to actually get the solutions, but to identify what those solutions could be. And then once we have solutions identified, that's when what we're going to have to do is go after grant funding to actually enact those solutions. So we've been in kind of a holding pattern, trying to wait and hear from them. It's taken them some time working with the model. Those that were in the August meeting, you heard me say that we were supposed to know at the end of September because that was the end of their fiscal year. That was the original plan. However, then all of the hurricanes hit and they all got deployed on hurricane relief. So it's been a more of a delay to get the results from them. Excitingly, I did actually receive the email today saying that they should have those results within the next few weeks to us, and that the report is done and they're just finalizing it and it's coming soon. So more to come on that very soon. And we actually have more progress coming. So that's exciting. So once we hear more, we'll be able to share hopefully what the next steps are. And I will say, just also as a heads up, there is a chance their modeling could show not really a whole lot that could be done, but fingers crossed and hopeful that we can actually have some answers there. that's that project. Kind of with that, we had talked about working with the engineers. So these are the engineers that we've been working with. So we work with Wendy Robertson and Dr. Scott Dirks, both at Central Michigan University. They're professors there. We also work with, Dr. Rod Lammers. I apologize. Dr. Wendy Roberts and Dr. Rod Lammers are both at Central Michigan. I read it wrong. And Mr. Scott Dirks and Miss Emma Geis, they are at GEI Consultants down in Ann Arbor. And so these are the folks that we work with for the data collection upstream that we've been working on. And Claire Zaracas, she is our community science fellow who actually put us in touch with them. So it's been kind of a growing effort in the past almost 5 years, which is exciting. Okay, so then what I wanted to do, kind of thinking also about that upstream effort, is I want to take a few minutes. If you were at the August meeting, you may remember me saying that we actually are going to get some real-time gauges put in upstream. And I'm excited to share that one of those gauges, the one on Southore Creek, is available and up and running. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to stop with the PowerPoint and actually show you how to find that gauge. So you can actually go in and at any given point, you can see what the water level is on Southore Creek flowing into where we are, which is exciting. All right, so if you are in here, and I'm going to kind of walk you through what that looks like. So if you're on the Huron River Watershed Council website, this is a partnership between Huron River Watershed Council and the University of Michigan. If you go into where it says our watershed and into the maps here, I'm going to scroll down and click on one that says water level and flow. And you'll get the entire Huron River watershed, and you can see all these different green and blue dots are the different gauges. And so I'm going to zoom into where we are. And you can see right here, we have Ore Lake, and then Southore Creek goes all the way up. And this little green dot here is the gauge that they installed on Southore Creek. This is fully funded through a graduate school department in the University of Michigan. And so this right here is showing us levels at Southore Creek at any given time. You can see these are the dates and times right here, what the water level is at all those times. So when we get a heavy rain at various points, you can even see right over here on November 20th, we did get more rain, and suddenly the level started going up. And so what we can do is we can actually start to track how much water is coming into us now that we have this real-time data, particularly during potentially upcoming flooding events. So this is something I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but it is a tool that we can start to use. We are going to have another one of these installed on Dubrova Creek as well. So we'll be able to start comparing both creeks for real-time data as to how much water is coming in. So instead of having to rely on water way downstream of us, that isn't actually our water, if we think about that gauge on the Huron River, this time we can actually start to use water that is our water that's coming in directly to us. So that's really exciting that this one is finally up and running. The other one should be in the next few months. All right. And so by the way, the PowerPoint is going to be on the website, as well as the recording from today. So you'll have the link directly to the gauge right there, or you can go right through the Huron River Watershed Council website like I just did. All right, so I'm going to turn it over right now to Diane Henry to talk a little bit about the project that's working on urban development upstream. Jay McDowell couldn't be here today, so Diane's going to fill in.
Hi, everyone. We've been meeting with the students for about as long as we've been working on this whole project. And as the students change, we have students that are overly interested and some other ones that just kind of float along with us on
Well,
what's going on.
it's good, except
Oh, hold on.
none of this is like,
I'm going to mute you, let Diane actually share for a minute, and then we can jump in after.
What was that, Jackie?
Sorry, go ahead,
Okay,
Diane. Keep
sorry.
going.
All right, anyway, so we met with them last week and we decided that a project would be the retention ponds upstream and what was required to put a retention pond in, what kind of plants it uses, how much water can it hold, how many do you need? When you release the water from a retention pond, any seasonal changes versus when the plants are living and the plants aren't living. Any regulations that we'd be required to apply for to see, any protected plants or maybe plants, invasive plants that are in there that we would need to get out of there to do that. And then any economical benefits that would help us, which would of course help us down here without the flooding and maybe, our house prices or use of the river use of the lake would be helpful to us. And then we could just do water quality testing on that when we hold the water back, what would that would do to our water, because we get filtered longer instead of just rushing down into us. We have gone to Partridge Point when it's been pouring down raining, and the water that is running down into South Oar Creek is just amazing. It directly right into us. So that water hasn't been filtered yet and just drops right into the South Oar Creek. And then what would happen with any of the local wildlife when we hold water back? Would it give, more space for like a beaver dam to be created in the wild? Or would that, the deer could be in there? Or would it just kind of flood some people out? What would it do with the trees that are over there? So all that stuff has to be considered when we're doing this. Do we have any questions? Okay.
Work, Diane.
All right.
Good work.
And then just to kind of follow up a little bit with the enforcement side of it is thinking about what's the regulations around enforcement if any of these retention ponds fail. And in some cases, some of the retention ponds are underground. And so the question is, how are they even monitoring them? What does it look like for enforcement? All of that stuff, especially as we think about all the development that continues to happen upstream. So kind of thinking about that. I will say the kids were fascinated thinking about the new car wash that went in by Meyer. And all that water and where it's going, and is it coming directly to us or is it going into an underground retention pond? There were lots of questions about that. So it's exciting to see their interest and trying to gather some information about it.
Yeah.
All right. So, the other thing I just wanted to mention for upstream development, we don't have time right this moment to talk about this, and other folks may know way more than I do. I just saw this kind of come across as I was gathering information from news sources, is that there is actually potential development going on around Latson Road to the point of 193 acres potential development, and that is within the watershed where we are. And so it's up in Genoa Township. I don't know really anything about it. I know there's been changes to the amount of acreage it's actually being potentially going to be developed. There's questions about what the development's going to be. But as you can see, this article is from WHMI on October 3rd. So there's still a lot of questions about, there's folks trying to fight against it. But this is something, if you're interested in looking into it, this might be an interesting space to consider and for us to consider pushing back on, because of course, any development upstream means more water for us. So something to keep in mind. All right, I'm going to turn over to Tony Licata to talk about the river outflow.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, so I'll start with the river cleanup efforts. The first, since I've joined the river cleanup team, the flood prevention committee that Pat urged us to reignite, that's scheduled for, the first river cleanup event is scheduled for April 26th, 2025. And so I just wanted to mention that. So I've been pulling in several people that have volunteered to help clear debris with chainsaws and whatever else. And that includes Dave Bruce and, oh, I don't have his name handy. Okay. But anyhow, and others. So that is ongoing. We are going to, Dave and I were talking at the last meeting at the township. There's apparently some debris that has already built up downstream, some log jams that we were going to take a kayak ride. My boats are put away for the year, so I can't get to them by pontoon, but Dave and I are going to take a pontoon kayak ride with our saws and try to clear debris. There's also new pileups at the Lakeland Trail Bridge. We were let's see, Bob Robertson, Dominic Zaccone, and I were out clearing the Lakeland Trail Bridge, I think back in October, and it's already piled up again. So we'll have to look at that as well. So that's our river cleanup work that will be ongoing, less in the winter, but hopefully really starting up big time in the spring. So I want to take a minute also then to talk about weed shift and the cattail destruction that's been going on. Can I share the screen, Amber, and show the weed shift graph we have? I don't have to, but
Really
no?
quickly, yes, really quickly.
Yeah.
We just don't have I want to give
Okay.
space for people the chat at the
Okay.
end.
Okay. I'll try to keep it quick, just so people understand where the weed shift. Can you see my screen?
No,
No,
Okay.
if you can't show it, Tony, we can add it
That's
to the
all right.
slide later.
Anyway, according to my share, here it is. Share, there it is. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is the weed shift for the year. You can see back in this November 2023, where the graph starts, weed shift and discharge were right neck and neck with each other through the summer months over where the gauge height rises up above the discharge, the thicker line. You can see that's when we were having our flood events. Now in November 2024, you can see that we're still at about 7.9 inches of weed shift. And that's abnormal. I've never seen this before. I've gone back in prior years and by now, normally the weeds have cleared out of the river every year that we've been measuring. So this is an unusual year. I just wanted to show you that. And I will stop sharing. I won't show the rest of the slides, but I want to talk about also the cattail destruction. So let me stop sharing here. I don't know how to do it. All right, so I won't take any more time. Amber, if you could shut me off there. I don't know. I don't know how to stop sharing.
Yep, I got you.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so as far as the cattail destruction and the river diversion and the rock wall goes, these have been ongoing concerns with Kurt Richardson and I. There is back in 2022, I sounded the alarm on this river diversion thing. It's upstream of where I live here on the river. And I alerted Dan Brown at the time with Huron Watershed Council. I was afraid that it might form an oxbow lake on the Ore Lake side of the river there where the main channel is and deter flow in the river. And he said that that's not a concern because Hidden Lake is spring fed. And so that will continue to flow into the river there. And so I had to agree with that. And so he kind of dismissed it. I was asking him to escalate it to Eagle to see if there's anything they could do about it. This was back a year or so ago, a little more than a year ago. But again, he dismissed it. And so I kind of dropped it at that point as an issue. Amber, you may remember that. Nevertheless, Kurt and I took a boat ride upstream from my house this year, and I showed him this, and he's kind of reignited the issue because and sent this as an issue to Eagle, separate from the rock wall, which I'll get into later, to Matt Rogers with Eagle, and Matt says that there's no complaint on it so far. So that's what's going on is the river has been diverted since back in 1992. Someone cut a channel through the cattail marsh, and that's been opening up wider and wider every year. And now it's really taking out most of the cattail marsh that is there. What that does is spreads out the flow of the river over the flats instead of through the channel where it naturally scours. What we have this year as a result of this, I believe, I'm surmising, but I'm pretty darn sure that as a result of this, the river's not scouring, and that's why we're seeing what you saw on the graph, which is unusual to this year, where weed shift is still going on. We're almost into the winter months, and we still have weeds in the river. Yes, we have warmer weather. There's other factors as well. be that as it may, weeds are worse than ever by far this year in the river. And that's due to lack of flow in the river for various reasons. Another reason there's lack of flow in the river has been a rock wall that was built as a kind of a point that goes out through the main channel, into the main channel. It's a 7-foot tall rock wall built in of the river bend by Hidden Lake there. And it is blocking a lot of the main channel's flow. Also exacerbating the situation with the cattail marsh being taken out. The cattail marsh is almost gone. It's shrunk probably 80% at this point from what it used to be back in the 70s when I was growing up here. And it will soon be gone because it's accelerating exponentially according to my rough estimations. And I've been tracking this now since I moved here. So I just wanted to mention that he is talking to Matt Rogers, Kurt is to Matt Rogers about this now, the rock wall as well. And Matt Rogers has escalated that to Bill Oming, which is in the compliance enforcement part of this case. There is a case on the rock wall now, and so that'll be ongoing. We'll continue to monitor that. So aside from those things, back to the cattail destruction.
Tony, we have got about another minute here to finish up.
Yep.
So we got other things.
He's advised us to appeal to the Army Corps of Engineers to see if there's anything they can do about it. At this point, it's pretty much a lost cause. So I'd like to propose a separate meeting for the river outflow group and about this whole river destruction thing. And aside from that, the SAD language went out today.
Yep, and we'll come back to that, Sad. We'll come back to that in a minute, Tony.
Thank you, everyone.
Awesome. Thanks, Tony. So yeah, any folks who are interested in any of these, all the things that Tony talked about, which is a lot, and I appreciate it. That's a great thing to reach out to Tony Licata here who just spoke, or Brian Bismack. They're the ones leading this outflow work. And so you can join that effort. And I know there's a number of folks on the call already who are already part of that. So that's great. Okay, so to kind of keep us going here, there's also the group focused, or the project team focused on the Fluke Dam. Kurt Richardson is leading that effort. He's not able to join tonight, so I'll just go ahead and jump in for him. So the Fluke Dam is going to, as Carrie had mentioned, is going to be lowering the level to their winter level on November 26th. So as Carrie said, we're going to keep the cameras around our lake and right at the culvert there in place so that we can see the effect, if there is an effect, of the Fluke Dam on our lake levels. So that'll be helpful to know that information. Also, as many likely know, that repairs to the Fluke Dam are already underway. Not the repairs themselves, but the process for it. The Washtenaw commissioners have put out the solicitation to get bids in November here. They're going to be awarding that contract in December. After that, there'll be a public hearing on the Chain of Lakes SAD, allowing those property owners that are affected by that to then review the proposed apportionments. And then following that, the Livingston and Washtenaw County Commissioners will then approve the bid and the process before the construction actually begins on those repairs in spring of 2025. Other things that Kurt wanted to share is he had reached out to the Huron River Watershed Council about their thoughts around supporting the efforts to remove the Fluke Dam. And in those conversations, there was concern as to the pushback and the extent and the ramifications of trying to go any route to be able to remove the Fluke Dam. So at the moment, they are not interested. And then the other thing to know is, and this team has been having some conversations about options to see if there's ways to petition the courts to actually change what's written into the case about the leveling of the Fluke Dam, to see if we can get something written into it that says during high water events, the dam should be lowered to X level. And so there's conversations about that, but still kind of fact finding and trying to figure out possibilities. So that's what that project is working on. So again, if you have interest in that, Kurt is the one to reach out for that. And then also Carrie had already touched base on this before, but Carrie's leading the efforts around changing the flood levels, again, getting it from 7 feet back down to 6.5. He and his team are going to be using the iFlood data. Thank you very much to all of you for submitting all that. That's really helpful because we'll be able to take that evidence that says, no, we actually are flooded. here's evidence of it when the river is indicating at 6.5 feet, not 7, to try and petition to get that change back down to 6.5 feet from the 7 feet. So that's in the progress too. So Carrie's working on that with his team.
I'd like to
So
thank
the
everybody, because we've
disaster-
got about, I'm sorry, we got about 225 reports. That's very helpful, especially this year. Thank you.
Yeah, that's awesome. So I'm moving fast because I want to give us time to be able to have the conversations at the end about the 2 other issues. So the 2 other projects to talk about, one is, as I mentioned, the Michigan disaster designation. So as of right now, basically what's going on in the state of Michigan is that even when a disaster is declared, there is no money, no line item in the state of Michigan budget that provides financial support to homeowners. All of it goes to public land, like libraries, things like that. So that creates challenges for all of us because we end up sitting in disasters for, in this case, months on end, and aren't able to get the financial support. The other challenge, as it says here, is FEMA's language says that a formal statement by a jurisdiction that a disaster emergency exceeds their response and recovery capabilities would then allow FEMA to come in and provide support. Problem is, when we are flooded, as we all know, there really isn't a whole lot anyone can do besides just kind of waiting for the water to go away. And so it begs this question of what does it mean for exceeding the response and recovery capabilities, which is why we did not get a disaster designation this summer because that language is also within other jurisdictions. So Hamburg Township, Livingston County, state of Michigan. And basically the way it works and lots of conversations is Livingston County couldn't really jump in unless Hamburg Township had declared a disaster. The state of Michigan couldn't jump in unless either of the other jurisdictions declared a disaster and so on. So this team with Deanna McDowell and Tracy Bruce, thank you, are working and gathering information about other types of language around disaster designations from other townships to see if there's different levels of them, see if we can get some other kind of thresholds set so we don't have to necessarily wait till this extreme level to actually get any help. So that's what this project is working on and gathering a bunch of information on that, which is super helpful. And then the last one, you've seen a couple emails about this. This project team has been working on supporting different grant applications to get money from FEMA for folks to be able to elevate their homes 2 feet above the 100-year flood level, which is very exciting. The HMGP application for the 10 houses was submitted. That one, I want to give a big shout out to Diane Henry, Maureen Malloy, and Kevin Malloy, who across those folks, as well as the other members of the team, Mark Tembrink and many of the other folks that are actually participating in that grant. It's probably over 100 hours put into that. It is a full team effort to be able to actually gather all that documentation. As I said, it was submitted last week, which is super exciting. A lot of documentation. We're waiting right now on feedback from the Michigan State Police Emergency Management Office. Once we get feedback, we'll make revisions and then get it back to them, and they'll submit the application to FEMA in January of 2025 with final decisions hopefully in the spring. So we're really hoping that we'll have a good chance to be able to get that funding. The other grant that's very related, similarly to same thing about elevating 2 houses, but for different designation reasons, it ends up in a different pocket. It's called the Swift Currents. That's for 2 houses. Those applications were already submitted. We did already receive feedback from FEMA. We're in the process of replying to that. And hopefully we'll then, once it gets back to FEMA in the next week or 2, we'll then be able to get the results on that one, the decisions from FEMA in the next couple of months. So that's all really exciting to see move forward. All right, so with this, what I want to do is just first give kind of an update on the meeting on Tuesday. The Board of Trustees had the meeting. I'm sure you saw lots of the emails go out where there was a memorandum put by Jason Negri, who's the township treasurer, questioning whether or not the township has a legal authority to actually use public monies on flooding. And so they had basically the way the meeting panned out is anytime you go to a Hamburg Township Board of Trustees meeting, if you have not been there before, at the very beginning of the meeting, there's a call to the public. Later on, they'll have a discussion and they'll have a final call to the public. So during the first call to the public, I want to give a big shout out to Carol Richardson, Carrie Adams, Brett Schnitzer. We had Carlo Martinez and Roy Foley, who were all willing to speak at the beginning, which was phenomenal. Spencer Clayton spoke at the end during the last call to the public, which really was a really nice way to provide the emphasis and the support. And a number of those folks also are lawyers to say, no, there is actually legal founding behind this. And so kind of all of that led into the conversation that the Board of Trustees then had later in the meeting. And during that time, they did verbally affirm their commitment to funding, continued funding of the weed harvesting and emergency management response during flooding events, which is what they are required to do based on their flood response action plan, which was called the FRAP. If you want to watch what happened, you can actually look at the recording from the meeting on Tuesday. A lot of the conversation that they had was around the SAD petition, which we'll talk about in a moment here. And it was, I will say also, it was less clear whether they are committed to still paying for having debris removed from the river. That wasn't quite stated explicitly. In comparison, the removal of the weed harvesting was stated. And then they also had acknowledgements of the funding, what they have funded related to the flooding, the weed harvesting, debris removal, flood response, previous support for other grant applications, and so on. So there was kind of acknowledgements at different points for what they have done. So again, thank you to those who spoke at the meeting. We're going to give space in a moment. I think what I'm going to do for time's sake is I'm also going to give you an update on the SAD petition because they're kind of related. And then we'll open it up for people to share and ask questions and all that stuff. So the other thing that's going on, as many of you heard, is the SAD petition that's called the Special Assessment District. Basically what this is to try, it is through gathering taxpayer money, our money, through taxes, to then use that to try and take on tasks to mitigate flooding. And so basically what's happening with this is different aspects or whatever is going to go into it have been drafted. They've been sent off to Hamburg Township. Actually, I think today it was. Thank you, Tony, for doing that. We're going to then await on the official language, and I'll talk about what was proposed in that already in a moment. The process is the township will write it up. They'll also determine who's actually involved in this, which is going to be any folks who have deeded access to Orr Lake. They're going to send that petition once everyone's approved on what the language is to Green Oak Township. Green Oak Township will also draft the same SAD, and that will be then distributed to the folks on Green Oak Township who also have access to Orr Lake. From there, once properties are identified, the petitions will be circulated by residents around here. Signatures will need to be gathered. Then at that point, there's 2 public hearings, and during those public hearings, there's information shared. That residents have a chance to change their votes depending on whatever they hear in this meeting. And the end result is the SAD, both of them, Green Oak Township 1 and Hamburg Township, both SADs would have to pass with 60% approval. If so, then the Board of Trustees will then vote to hopefully approve it. And then from there, the SAD money would start to be taken out of everyone's winter taxes come December 2026. Or I'm sorry, applied to the winter taxes come December 2026. So that's kind of the process of it, a big overview. After the meeting, I can send out the document from Hamburg Township that outlines in more detail what that process is. I know there's been a lot of questions as to what is written into the SAD. So a group of residents came together earlier this week and had conversations about it. What was decided to add into the SAD was to put in there to harvest the weeds up to 3 times a year when the weeds shift, what Tony shared. That weed shift, a weed shift, as a reminder, is how much higher the river is because of the weeds. So harvest the weeds up to 3 times a year when there's a weed shift of a minimum of 8 inches. So we don't have to wait until it's super high and then accidentally end up flooded in that process. Also log removal or debris removal as the funding is available, and also removing of the weeds on Orr Lake at least once as funding is available. So that's the language that was kind of suggested to be written into it. Right now, it's kind of waiting to hear what that language will actually look like and more reviews and so on. But that's the current proposal as to what's going to be written into the SAD. So with all that information, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and open it up for people to ask questions. Let's start with questions that people have either about the, any of the projects we have, also potentially about the SAD petition that is going to be potentially coming around, but then also potentially about the meeting on Tuesday at the Hamburg Township. So I just want to throw that out there. So if you'd like to ask questions, feel free to either put them in chat, which I can see there's a few already, or go ahead and jump in.
I have a question.
Hey, Brett.
So I came across 2 articles. You may have already seen these from Michigan State MSU Extension regarding establishing a legal lake level for inland lake. I don't know if it's feasible. I'm just putting it out there. it seems to me that there's this process, you have an engineer, and I don't know if the Army Corps of Engineers are doing this or not, but engineers come in and make a determination as to what the feasibility and cost of keeping the level at a certain, within a certain range, and then it looks like the drain commissioner, if you're able to, and then you go to circuit court and have the judge rule on whether that whether he's going to agree to that process. And then if he does agree, then the drain commissioner, it gets shifted to the drain commissioner, who then has to enforce it. And I just looked briefly at the drain commissioner. Apparently they have a lot of power. Like, they can get money, they just have a lot of financial power. So I'm just wondering if that water level issue has been considered, and if it's feasible. I don't know. I'm tossing that out there. But there's 2 articles by MSU, by a woman at MSU who's apparently an expert in this. I'm trying to find her name. Jane Herbert. So yeah, is that something that's come up?
I don't know of that coming up, but if you want to share that, share those with me, Brett, I can get those sent out to folks.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for finding those. What other questions do people have? I saw I will just jump in. There's a question in the chat about it says, did the homeowner who put in the rock wall pull an appropriate permit with Eagle?
Well,
Tony, do you have any insight on that?
I can answer that. They claimed to, however, when we contacted Eagle, they did not. And so it's a violation. And so it's, like I say, it's been sent to the enforcement division with Eagle.
Thank
I
you.
see another thing there about the Google Maps history. And I just want to say, yeah, I have all of that. How the river diversion developed over the years and widened.
All right, do other people have other questions around, or in this case, we can open up to thoughts around either the township meeting on Tuesday or the SAD petition that will likely be coming around in the next few months, or any of the other projects that we've been working on? Or thoughts you have?
Are we off mute?
You are, yes, go ahead.
Okay. I want to know where that gauge is in South Oar Creek. Is it before or after the retention ponds that they have up there for the treatment plant?
It's after.
It's
Mhm.
after. Okay.
Yep, it's
Okay.
after. It's right near, it's near this Hamburg Road Bridge.
Okay. What about the SAD? How much is that going to increase people's taxes? Any idea? Is anybody?
Yeah,
We don't know yet. It's gonna depend on, well, it's gonna depend on first what gets put into it. So what I shared was a proposal by residents. We don't know yet how the township will actually write it in legally for that language. And then what's gonna happen is once that's determined, they're gonna put bids out and they're gonna use those bids to actually determine the cost and then divide that across residents. I do know the township has talked about using the same percentages. I don't know how exactly they're quite figured out, but apparently back when the Chain of Lakes SAD was set up, the Washtenaw County determined different percentages based on homeowners or property owners who had access, who had lakefront versus property owners who had deeded access but were behind. And so that the amount charged to each homeowner would differed depending on whether or not you had lakefront versus deeded access. And according to folks at Hamburg Township, they intend to use the same percentage difference. I don't know what that is. I don't know those details, but that's all I know. But we don't have an exact number until the bids are put out there.
Okay. Okay. I got one more question. What what is it, Partridge Ridge?
Partridge Point,
Partridge what?
Point, I think.
Point, well, that big subdivision that's dumping the water, all of that water has fertilizer in it. Do they have to stop fertilizing? Because they said everybody around the lake, you cannot fertilize anymore, otherwise you'll be fined. I wonder, I mean, can there be a ban on fertilizer to these places that dump into there? Because that's causing the weed growth.
No, I appreciate you
And during
saying
the
that.
meeting, Pat spoke about that, and the reality is there is, ordinance in place to not use those fertilizers, and especially not within 50 feet of a body of water, lake or otherwise. The problem you have is enforcement. Unless you actually catch somebody that has a, Grow Green truck in their front yard, or they're spreading Scotch +2 all over the place. They've been told not to use those fertilizers around the bodies of water. So they have an ordinance in place, and up to including a fine if they catch somebody. The reality is, how do you enforce it? You don't have somebody riding around every day looking at.
The ordinance that Carrie's referring to it states that no one in Hamburg Township can use any fertilizer between October and
October,
April,
yeah.
I believe it is.
Yeah.
And then anyone within 50 feet of a waterway can never use fertilizer at any point in the year. So
Right.
that's what the ordinance says, but again, like Carrie said, it's an enforcement thing. But I appreciate you saying that, Dave.
I have a follow-up question to the question I was just asked. So after you come down from that subdivision and where that new subdivision is being put in, I don't know what that one's called. It's between Orr Lake and Partridge, whatever it's called, Partridge Ridge. Is that what that is? Partridge Ridge up there?
Yeah, or Lake Estates, I think it is. Yeah.
Yeah. So below that, but below the Orr Lake Estates, there's a lot of wetland area. Can they divert at least, Orr Lake, so some of it fills up that wetland area a little more? I mean, it obviously isn't going to solve the problem, but it seems like they could do some channels so that at least it diverts some of the water into that wetland area.
So I love that you asked that question, Brett, and that's actually partly what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is working on. I think someone's chatting. If someone can like
Can somebody mute?
their
He's
house
on the phone.
themselves.
Thank you. Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Amber.
Okay, so that when I was talking about the Army Corps of Engineers, the flood inundation study that we should be hearing at like any day now from,
Yeah.
that's what they've been trying to figure out. So they used our data from South Orr Creek, from Dubrova Creek, at the outflow of the river, at the culvert. They also used a whole bunch of data they collected, and their model's going to try and figure that out. And so what they put into the model is, for example, if we put giant retention ponds on Dubrova Creek in that wetland you just talked about, would that make a difference? If we put giant retention ponds on South Orr Creek in the Brighton Recreation Area where there's a bunch of wetlands, would that make a difference? Maybe multiple of those. I will say when the last time we talked to them, which was back in, I think, August, they did say that just one retention pond, like just one on Dubrova Creek, right where you're talking about, Brett. For those that don't know, it's like right up on the north side of Orr Lake by like Branch Drive and all that, up where we are. One retention pond there is not going to make a difference according to their modeling. However, the question was, can we do multiple efforts upstream, maybe downstream, and also the timing of those efforts to actually have an effect? And so that's what they're trying to figure out. So hopefully, yes, but we'll see.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, those are good ideas, Brett, and multiple detention ponds staged at different points of release could be beneficial.
Yeah.
The thing
I mean,
is to have the thing
Yeah.
is to have the Army Corps of Engineers come back and say, look, you got a 220 acre lake. Here's how much area you're going to need, and here's the staging of those to be effective. Completely eliminate flooding? Probably not. But to stage
Right.
the inflow of the water, like Amber was talking about, yeah, we think
Yeah.
there's some benefits there. But again, we need the experts to help us because none of us are.
Right. Who owns that wetland area there? I mean, it's I don't think it can be developed. I mean, can they
It's-
dig? Can they make, when you say retention, can they make a deep retention ponds, at least, I mean, I agree with you, Carrie. I don't think it's gonna relieve the problem, but it may lower the water a little bit, you know? I mean,
That's the hope,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
That is privately owned. I mean, you can do a lot if you can get a permit for it. So yeah, you could do that, but it would involve working with that property owner that's there. It's the person who owns that is the person who owns all of Orr Lake Estates up there.
I see. Okay. Great.
And the other thing you have to be careful of is, you know, it's to go in there and dredge and dig and, you know, move stuff around, you can do that, but you gotta be talking to some of the environmental people of what you're going to
Right.
do, because you're gonna disrupt things if you do that. But
You're right. I'm sure there's lots
that
of
doesn't mean
regulations.
that, you know,
Yeah,
we trust in the Army Corps of Engineers' ability to convince. So we're hoping if they're convincing enough, we can get some things done.
What other questions do folks have or comments?
Amber, just a quick question. We were not able to make the township meeting. You had followed up and you shared in your slide that there was a verbal commitment to continue this kind of, I mean, we've been homeowners maybe 6 months, but just kind of curious, what do you feel, you know, what's your confidence level that they will follow through and continue that work?
You're asking me personally, I would say pretty high. Their commitment to the weed harvesting.
Mhm.
I don't know about other efforts. But it's hard to say. There's going to be a new board starting in December, so they may have different commitments. It's kind of difficult to say. There were various amounts of money that were shared at that time. We're in conversation with some folks about seeing if we can get access to that funding, just to get a sense of what has been spent on flood related things since 2005. But I mean, to be honest, it's a drop in the bucket specifically for weed harvesting one time a year. So I think it was a unanimous commitment verbally from the members on the board on Tuesday in support of continued weed harvesting. If the SAD goes through, will they do one as well as the ones for the SAD? I don't know. I don't know what other people thought. There was a number of you folks that were here on the call. What are your perspectives having sat in the meeting on Tuesday?
Well, the belief was that they're not all that crazy about spending their own money, but obviously a SAD relinquishes them from having to invest continuously. So if we pick up the tab, the sense that I got was they're more than likely to try to honor the language we put into the SAD. In other words, they're more likely to do the weed harvesting we asked for, simply because it's not coming out of their wallet. That's the sense that I got.
Well, that was my question. They committed to paying for some weed harvesting and debris removal. So why do we need a SAD to pay for that if they've committed to pay for it out of township funds? It seemed a little odd to me.
Amber had the best answer for that to me, is that there's going to be a new board coming in, and because up to this point, that's sort of been supervisors' discretionary money they've used. And they may just cut that off and we'll get no. That's where this all.
Yeah. Yeah. The
I hope I got
supervisor's
the
not
right
changing
answer.
it.
Yeah.
There we go.
And I think the other thing to remember, and I know Linda, you have your hand up, I appreciate that. The other thing to remember too is with the SAD, if the like language that was recommended by the group of folks who pulled it together ends up going into it, it's saying harvesting the weeds up to 3 times a year versus right now the township doing it 1 time. And like all of us who are adults on this call know that when you have one set pocket of money, you have to use it the best time. And the best time to harvest the weeds, according to the USGS, is mid to late July. The problem is that's happened a few times now that they waited and then we were flooded and they couldn't get in. So it's like, it's a mixed bag. I agree there's not like necessarily a commitment, but it's also a difference. What that means if the SAD goes through, I don't know. Linda, go ahead. Oh, you're still muted, Linda. Can you unmute yourself?
There we go. Okay, in 2021, that Lakeland Bridge was completely occluded with cattails. Is our SAD supposed to cover something that the township built that we don't have any benefit except getting, you know, the water level with those cattails? It was 8 feet on our lake because, you know, our house, half of it had water in it. So you know, that's the worst flooding I've ever seen. You know, 8 feet is catastrophic on Little Oar. I mean, and the township should have maintained that bridge. They should have realized the cattails were there, and who suffers? Us. I mean, 8 feet was overwhelming, just overwhelming. So is our SAD supposed to cover that?
Good point.
We don't really, the bridge is a decoration to how many people have gone over that bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge, but it affects all of us property owners.
I'll respond to that, Amber. Correct me if I'm wrong. The SAD language is going to be vague enough where it covers not only log removal and weed harvesting, but also debris removal of any kind anywhere in the stretch of river we've identified, which includes that bridge. So I would answer yes. It will. The SAD will cover that and pay for give the township funds to do that. However, Linda, you are correct. The township should pay for that outside of the SAD, and they already are. I think on a couple of occasions they have gone in there and cleared away debris from the Lakeland Trail Bridge.
But it should be routine maintenance for them. You know, it should have never become so, what should you say, big, huge islands of cattails. And that's when the water went up to 8 foot.
Yeah.
Because as soon as they took the boats in and took the big islands of cattails out, our lake immediately went down. I mean, that was the August, mid-August flood in 2021 when the water went up 8 feet, and it was literally, we couldn't even get into our home from our driveway. We had to wade through ankle deep water to get into the street side of our home. And then our other home, you know, it was half full of water. So, I mean, I think that is our biggest flood we've had in a few years, but you know, cause and effect.
This year was 8.12, yeah.
Oh, 8.12. Well, the
And the
8.3.
problem, yeah, the biggest problem with this year is it lasted 68 days above 6.5. Yeah, it was 2 months. That's the longest it's ever lasted since I've been here. Yeah. So yes, all real
Sorry.
world things, yes.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thanks, Linda. We're at time. I'm happy to stay on. Peter, I see that you have a question. I'm going to turn over to you in a second. But I do want to give space. We'll keep going. We'll keep having the conversation, but it is 8 o'clock for those folks who want to step away. I just want to say thank you. Before we keep the conversation going, I do have one more slide that I want to share. And then Peter, I'm going to come back to you, I promise. Just to kind of pull it all together before we continue the discussion. Just a last minute thing. Like I said, we'll keep having the conversation. We'll come back to Peter in a moment. Couple things. We are in need of someone. If there's anyone willing that would love to help volunteer in our organization, we would love to have someone whose task would be to monitor the Hamburg Township Board of Trustees meeting packets to identify any topics that come up related to flooding. So we in the past have had someone be able to let us know. That's how we knew Tuesday's conversation was on the agenda. And so, but we're not going to have that necessarily moving forward. And so it'd be really great if someone was willing to actually volunteer their time to do that. Yep, I know. And then our next meeting, I just want to let everyone know, our next organization meeting is actually going to be in March because of the holidays and like people, I know some folks on the call are going to Florida, all those things. Our next meeting will be on March 13th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. And then the other thing, just to note, I have it in yellow here. As you saw, our team has been working incredibly hard in the past few months. We have all been through a lot with all the flooding, all the effort, all those things. So I just want to let you all know that starting Wednesday before Thanksgiving, our organization is going to take a sabbatical through January 1st, and we'll resume work on January 2nd. That doesn't mean we don't care. It just means we all need time to step away, be with family, all of those things. So that's kind of where we are. I'll stop sharing my screen. Peter, I want to turn it over to you. You had a question, and we'll keep going in the conversation, but feel free to step away. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We really appreciate it. Again, stay on if you'd like. Otherwise, thank you. I will ask also if possible, the advisory board can stay on after too. Cool. All right, Peter, thank you. Thanks, Paula. And yeah, where, Peter, your question, where are you? There you are.
Yeah, I had two quick questions and comments. One was, is there any way of holding people's feet to the fire as far as retention ponds and remedial work for places that have not put them in? Let's say, you know, the mall up where Costco is, where they have the dry moat up there that doesn't do anything. And you had mentioned that the car wash. I mean, are there laws on the books that'll help us put these people on notice that they need to do something about that?
That's a great question, Peter, and that's what the students, and actually, I think you're on that committee. That's
That
your
group,
team, that's your team, that's your job. That's what you guys are figuring it out.
Put that to, now, the other question I had was, as far as how did the flood level get raised and who made that determination? And the one thing that I see is I'm watching the levels have not gone down. It's almost like they raised the levels because they knew that the levels were going to go up. Because as I look, I look at posts that I've seen in the river or on the lake, and the lake levels have been up high for a long time. And it's almost like, well, we knew I was going to do it, so we're going to do that. I don't know who makes the determinations of that, and how can it be changed?
So that's a really good question. I was actually meeting with the disaster designation team earlier and this question came up, so I'll jump in, and other folks jump in after. So we actually don't have a clear answer of exactly who is the one who makes the decision. I will tell you instead what happened when that change happened. So it was back in 2021. Linda already talked about that extensive flood. We were very high in August, continued into September. And then what happened was, like always, anytime there's a flood, it's required for Hamburg Township to have reflection, in a sense, where they come at during one of the board meetings, they talk about all the response that they did, all the things that happened. This is required based on their FRAP, the Flood Response Action Plan. And so during that meeting, it was November 2nd, 2021. You can go back to the recording and watch it. They were talking about the response. And at one point in that meeting, there was it wasn't a mention that the level changed, but it was a mention of like the level. And there was a slight mention there. I actually had to step out of the meeting because I had a phone call from the state of Michigan for a grant at that time. And so it wasn't directly stated out loud, the flood level was changing. And then later in the meeting, I got up and I was having a conversation with the board about asking them questions about response and next steps and things like that. And I kept saying, you'll see it in the recording, I kept saying, okay, when the river level reaches flood stage at 6.5 feet, and the response I heard from the board was when the river reaches flood level. It was never an acknowledgement. And in that FRAP, it says flood response, the flood level at 7 feet. So it wasn't actually stated that there was a change. And I talked with some board members after, they weren't even sure, they didn't even realize that a change had been made. Now, with that, following that meeting, there was questions to the township of, did you change the flood level? And the response was, no, the USGS changed the flood level. After that, Carrie reached out to the USGS, and they were told that the township told them to change the flood level. So we've had kind of a back and forth. We don't really have a sense of who actually made that change. But that is when it happened, was in November of 2021. Or actually, I think October of 2021, and it kind of came out in early November of 2021.
Yeah.
Since then, I will also say the descriptions for what constitutes minor flooding, which is now 7 feet, moderate flooding, which is 7.5, and so on. Those descriptions on the USGS website also have changed to now include language specifically about Orr Lake. That was never the case before. And now it specifically talks about Orr Lake. I am going to guess because they know that we want to push back on this and say, well, we actually have flooding. And so now it's trying to like potentially push against that. I don't know, that's a speculation. But there has been various changes since then. So that's the history behind it. I don't know if anyone else has any knowledge of who actually makes that change, but that's the history.
All I can say is that Danny Castillo and USGS specifically stated that they don't make those changes. Those changes come from the townships or counties where these bodies of water are located, because they really don't have any control over that, nor do they even know what you would consider the various flood levels of all the different lakes and rivers. So they don't necessarily make changes without being given the directive to do that. So we don't know exactly where it came from, but we know who didn't create those changes. That's all I can say.
I see, Bob, you had a question in the chat. Do you want to jump in and ask your question? Oh, we can't hear you. Uh-oh.
You're muted.
I don't think Bob's muted. Oh, try again, Bob. Try unmuting again. Try unmuting again. Uh-oh,
I don't know, we were looking at his socks.
I don't think his microphone's working. Uh-oh. So Bob, I think, because I can't hit your microphone, I don't think is working. I hear you talking about like the upstream and the retention ponds and the developers. So are you trying to ask about who's actually responsible for like regulating that and like kind of holding their feet to the fire? Is that what you're asking? Awesome. Perfect. That is a great question. My thought is it'd be the Drain Commission. I don't actually know. That's actually what the students are working on with Peter's help, who's here. And she's not here. Someone else I forget is on that project. Peter, who else is with you on that one?
Jay, and then I can't remember her name, the woman who talked
Oh,
tonight.
Jackie. Jackie's
Yes.
also on it. So yeah, so those are the folks that are working on that. We don't have a direct answer. So Bob, did you want to help with that effort? Was that what you're hoping for? I wish we could hear you. If you can't, try typing another question into the chat. While Bob's working on that, does anyone else
Well,
have any other questions?
I'll
or
answer
thoughts?
for Bob. I think he's saying, yes, I would be very happy to help with that. Thank you, Bob.
Tony's an expert at throwing it over the wall.
I'm just
Whether-
reading his lips.
Yeah.
Other folks have questions or thoughts while Bob's drafting his. All right. All right. Well, with that, we'll stay on because I'll keep waiting to see what Bob's question is. But I do want to say thank you everyone very much for coming today. Oh, here we go. They profit from selling properties, but why not make them pay for the runoff? I appreciate that, Bob. That's a really good point. I don't know who pays for it. I don't know who pays for the when the retention ponds stop working. I don't know what that looks like. That's a really good point. I appreciate you mentioning that. We'll share that with the team. Peter can actually take that up right away in his team.
Well, there's actually, and I'll bring it up at a meeting. I missed the last meeting because there was a mix-up, or the first and last meeting. But the city of Detroit actually has, they charge people in the city for the runoff from their homes and their property. And, we really don't have any say of what Brighton does, and I don't think that they're going to hop on the bandwagon to charge their citizens for their runoff. But we're actually funding through our flooding at the lake, their runoff upstream. So I don't know. It's something to think about. I don't know if you'll get very much action on that, but we're subsidizing the development upstream with taking all the runoff that comes there. So it's something to think about anyhow.
Hey, Peter, from our meeting with the students last week, they came up with a document from the Drain Commissioner that had all sorts of different things in it. It was 190 pages long. And maybe you want to see if you can go out and find it. And then
Okay,
see what some stuff
so-
is in it.
So do you have access to that, or the students had that?
The students had that.
Okay, all right. Yeah, no, I thank you for that. I'll take a look at that and
Yeah,
see.
thank
I saw what the Drain Commissioner sent, or what Amber sent from the Drain Commissioner, and when I read his response to Amber, I was a little bit disappointed because it seemed like he was sort of punting on the development upstream there. But they do have a lot of power. The Drain Commissioners have a lot of power, and if you can put their feet to the fire, they could be somebody we could work along with if we get them to do what they're supposed to do.
Yeah, and
Well, I can only speak to this.
Yeah,
Go
go
ahead,
ahead.
Amber.
No, go ahead.
Well, I've been through one of these. And it was in Saline where the our development, 72 households, were going to be held, but the developer was responsible for funding a road improvement project, and none of our houses fronted that road project. It took us 5 years and taking them to court, but we ultimately proved that we were not liable for that. The developer had to be responsible because of his development that was causing the problem. So can we win a battle like that? I don't know. It's very long and drawn out to do something like that, but the statement that the developer of any of those projects north of us near those watersheds have no skin in this game, it's pretty easy to prove that they do. Now, how do we take that on? I don't know. I know how we won the last one, but I don't know if it's even worth the trip on this one. But the developer does have some skin in the game, and townships can hold them accountable. So, for what that's worth.
And
Hey,
I
I
will
don't
say,
want-
oh, go ahead,
ahead.
Diane. No, go ahead.
Well, and to go on Carrie, I don't want to put more water in the fire here, but the whole road work on US 23, they are putting in new drainage ponds and everything around that for all their new cement that they're putting in, and I don't want to tell you where the water's going. But it is coming our way.
Well, sure. Well, my
And
point,
going
I'm
back-
talking about the housing developments and all that north. Developers that are doing that development could be held accountable, could be.
Yeah.
To some degree.
And I will say to your comment about the drain commissioner, interestingly, the drain commissioner, Brian Jonkier, has actually never come out here during any of the flooding. I've never met him in all of the meetings that I've had with all of the people. However, Ken Recker, the assistant drain commissioner, has been out here a lot. And at first, when Diane and I first started, he was not here much. And since then, in the past 4.5 years, we have gotten him on board, and he is very much supportive of our work and very much wanting to help. So I think we do have some connections there, Peter, when your team has taken up some of this, and Bob's helpful comment there, so we can think about what we could do. So working with them.
Just to sort of say pile on to what Diane was saying, it hurts me to hear about the drains coming from US 23, but when they redid downtown Brighton, I mean, all they did was concrete over everything there. And it seems like when that project finishes, we really had some of our worst flooding here. Would any of what the folks have been doing upstream, the Corps of Engineers, would that show any increased flows from those types of developments, like especially the Brighton one, since it was during their study time? Would any of their data show that?
The Army Corps' work?
Right. I don't know enough about the report, but if they had a long enough time frame, like prior to, downtown Brighton being paved over or different things, I mean, does that data show any of that? Or we don't see it, we haven't seen it yet, but maybe we do take a look at that and see if it, there's nothing you can do after, the barn doors closed after all the animals are gone, but at least you can try and do something to mitigate what's been.
Amber, isn't that report of what the kids did with the that shows the historical development and the changes in all of the watersheds, doesn't that
Yes.
kind of answer what Paul's
Yeah.
asking for here?
Yeah, so the Army Corps doesn't have that because they don't have the capacity to collect long-term data.
We do.
The project that they funded was only for 1 year, basically, of data collection, and they've been working on the model development since then. But what Carrie's referring to is a former student at Innovation Academy. She's now graduated. Lena Zilkowski, she actually did a study using ArcGIS and mapping software to actually look at the impact of increased development in the South Oak Creek watershed, including Brighton, and its impact on the types of wetlands. And it actually was interesting to see how it wasn't necessarily less wetlands, but the wetland types changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that actually has huge impacts on water retention because different types of wetlands hold different amounts of water. That is a published study. It's on our website, and we can make sure you have access to it, but you can go on any point in time.
It's a great, I've read it, I've looked through it, it's a great study.
Mhm.
She did a great job.
She did awesome work. Yeah. Are there any other questions, comments, thoughts before we fully close out here?
My
I'm
last
just
one
trying to
is,
follow
thank you,
this.
Diane. Oh, sorry. Go ahead,
Sorry.
Mike.
Just
No,
a dumb question, because I don't know about this, but what I'm kind of learning is that these developers have to have retention ponds constructed, engineered retention ponds for any development they do to offset the destruction to natural drainage or water that would normally have been absorbed in the wetland or whatever property they developed. Is that an engineered thing that should have plans developed where we can look at all of that stuff and have experts pour through it to make sure there's no violations to ensure that downstream, like at Orr Lake, we're not going to have issues as a result of it. They should be able to prove that ahead of time or be denied a building permit. Isn't that true?
So when Diane and I
if
were
I-
there last week, there are regulations as to what those retention ponds are supposed to like look like, size, things like that. The students are gathering more information on that. What's interesting is there's options to do underground retention ponds. And a lot of Brighton is actually going in the underground retention pond space because of just space capacity. They don't have a place to put the actual above ground retention ponds. But that creates a lot of questions as to how you monitor it, how you regulate it, what happens if it fails, how do you know? So the students are, with Peter's help and Jackie and Jay, who their teacher, they're actually gathering that information to figure out what those regulations are. And then to be able to help us all think about together with their help as well, like what next steps we can take to try and make sure that that there is follow through and that people are held accountable for it. And like Bob was saying, maybe force people to pay for it, which would be great to pay for that because we shouldn't be paying for it.
No, historically on our 72 house development, they had to engineer and install 5 detention ponds, 1 acre in size. So there is a guideline or an ordinance that requires a developer to do some of these things. I have no idea what it looks like. I haven't seen it, but there is a requirement that they have to do it. Now, is it enough to be effective for us? I don't know. We'd have to see what that is, but
They
there is a
probably
requirement for developers to do water management. Yes.
they probably have to calculate the amount of acreage and offset.
Everything you already know, Tony. Yeah, everything you already know. They have to go through all of that. Now, have they done that? I have no idea.
Right.
We'll see.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you all very much for coming tonight. It was awesome to see you all. I really appreciate all of the support, the input and everything, and also all the volunteering. Thank you so much to everyone who's been volunteering. It's awesome to see so many more people involved in our work. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving, wonderful holiday break, all of the things. Like I said, we will be off for the month of December. We'll come back on January 2nd. So thank you all for everything. Really appreciate it.
Thank
You're a
you.
great leader. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes.
Great job.
Yes. Thank you.
I am going to ask the advisory board if you guys can stay on for just a moment. That'd be great. Thank you. And thank you, Carlo, for speaking on Tuesday. Appreciate it. And Brett.
My pleasure.
Yes, Brett, thank you very much. That was fun.
Yes.
Bye.
No problem. My pleasure. All right.
See you,
Thank you,
neighbor.
everyone. You guys are doing a great job.
Hey, Brett, can I ask you a question before you get off?
Yeah.
I don't know if it was you or Carlos that talked about spending public monies on cleaning up a waterway, a natural river waterway. Was that you in your speech or Carlos?
Yeah, it was probably, well, I know I did. I can't remember if Carlos touched on it, but I know I talked about, you mean the statute that gives them authority to spend money on a public waterway?
Yeah, well, you said something about having residents spend the money out of the funds out of their money or something. You had mentioned something about that too. No?
Well, I was going through a legal test to try to persuade them that from a legal standpoint that they should continue with the weed harvesting and the debris removal. So there's like a 6-point test from the case that the treasurer of on the board of trustees was relying on, although in his memo he's just cited the one of the 6 factors. So I was trying to emphasize that there were 5 other factors. So I probably talked about that as it related to the 6 factors.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, not a problem. Did that answer your question? I don't know if it did. Might not have.
It kind of did.
What,
I'm just thinking
I guess
about relationship to the SAD where we put money in and then the township doesn't, and maybe they're, because of
Yeah,
the waterway.
Yeah, to me that, the problem. I hear what you're saying. To me, that seems a little inequitable. However, there is a concern that that they'll stop funding the weed harvesting. Now, they said at the meeting that they would continue. So, but if it's kind of apple, there's kind of an overlap there. So I mean, when you do this public or this payment plan, then is the township going to get out from underneath their obligation to pay for anything? I don't know.
Well, that was kind of the question I asked based on what Amber was kind of hoping I would ask, is that if the SAD passes, does that relinquish the township from doing anything? And they specifically said, no, they still have to be engaged.
I mean, how about
Now-
putting it in the SAD? Can you
Well-
put in the SAD that we expect the
I don't-
township